Okay, last week we were studying the genealogies and everything, so this week we get to start on Joseph. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a lot of comparisons between Joseph and Jesus, because there's so many parallels from Joseph and Jesus that you can't help but see that he is a type and shadow of Jesus. And I mean, the story is just replete with different things that are Jesus-like things. So we're going to get started tonight. And of course, about the time you get started, then next week we're going to get into Judah and his sons. So we're going to leave him in prison and have to stop for a while. But that's okay, because we need to find out about the kinsman redeemer and those kinds of things. Then we go back to Joseph again. But I'm going to love it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to love it. Okay, we have studied the genealogies of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to see how the foundation of Israel came about. We've seen how Ishmael and Isaac were separated from the line of God's seed, and now how Jacob and Isaac have branched off into the line of Israel and everybody else. After Jacob, there were only Israelites in his line. I want to kind of make the point that with Abraham, he had Ishmael. They went off that way. Then we had Jacob and Esau went off that way. So the seed line is going through Jacob. But after Jacob, there's nothing but Israelites. There's no branching off anymore. That's why they call them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs. But Joseph is not a patriarch. Reuben and Levi and all of them are not patriarchs. They are the tribes. But the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob loved Rachel, but she was barren for many years. So Jacob had many sons from 4 wives. But Rachel was always the special one for him. Rachel finally had a son, and she named him Joseph. Joseph immediately became Jacob's favorite son, as he was his son in his old age from Rachel, the one he loved. So all of these wives, Leah and Bilhah and the other one, whoever that is, had given him sons, but Rachel was barren until she was old. But then she had Joseph, and later she had Benjamin when she died. Okay, but since Rachel was his favorite, Joseph was going to be his favorite son. So some of these boys were now 30 or 40 years old, and here's Joseph coming along, and he's going to be bossing them around. So it's not going to go over very well.
Definitely got the birthright.
Yeah. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were known as the patriarchs, but Joseph was not. Jacob's sons would end up as the tribal names of Israel. But as far as founders, that had already been done by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Today we'll start to study the life of Joseph and see how God showed his people their future and reveal a mystery through Joseph. Joseph will show us many ties between himself and the future revelation of Jesus. Joseph will be the main character of Genesis study from now on. So we're in 37, so all the way through 50, except for next week's 38, it's going to be about Joseph in the future. So the last 2 chapters, 49 and 50, are about the patriarchs, about Jacob and his blessings on his children, but he's still going to be talking about Joseph. So Joseph is going to be the main character for the rest of the Bible, or the rest of Genesis, rather. 37:1. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, he was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and I underline wives to make a point. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now we're learning here that this is the history of Jacob. And it's starting out talking about Joseph. And Joseph is 17 years old, and he is giving a bad report on his brothers. Now if you'll notice, Bilhah and Zilpah were named wives. They were the concubines. The word here used is wives. So they may have been upgraded to a wife level, and their sons are going to be equal share inheritors of the tribes. But see, Reuben and Simeon and Levi were Leah's sons, and they're being cut out. So it's going to kind of start getting a little, it's going to move around some here. But the point is, Bilhah and Zilpah are now equal wives, and their sons are being told on. Normally, in the pecking order of things, these sons would have less stature than the sons of the wives, if that makes any sense. So when he came back to rat on them and tell them that they had done something wrong, whatever the report was, he would have been looked at as, you know, you're messing with me now, son. I'm not just one of the concubine sons, you know. There's a order of seniority, I guess you'd call it there. Now Israel, notice he says Israel, not Jacob. Remember we talked about use of the word Israel and Jacob.
Right.
Loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. They hated him so bad they couldn't even talk with him because they would make some kind of snide remark. So he was in bad shape. Now this tunic of many colors, there's a lot of commentary on this. The word that they use there is royal tunic. A lot of people have it like a jacket or something. This thing was a robe. It went all the way to the floor, and it had sleeves. And their clothes didn't have sleeves. So basically, the only thing I want to tell you here is that this was a coat of royalty, making the other brothers so jealous that they wanted to kill him. Because you know yourself, with one wife and 3 or 4 kids, they're all going to think that the other one's a favorite. They're all going to fight over mama loves you best or something. Well, this is 4 wives and 12 kids. And Jacob didn't make any point about it. He just said, Joseph is it. We find here that Joseph was 17 years old when we start to hear about his life in Scripture. He didn't start out with flattery. Since he was Jacob's favorite, he was given the responsibility of reporting back to his father about the care of the flocks and checking on his brothers. His brothers didn't like him reporting back to their father about what they were doing, so he was hated by them to the point they couldn't say a good word to him. It would be almost like Randy doing a job and one of the kids coming back and reporting on Randy. You know, he was not going to like it. I'm a grown man. In fact, Reuben was the firstborn. Why wasn't he made overseer to do all this?
Which was customary.
Exactly. So Joseph was only 17, and he didn't even have to go out in the fields. They were the ones watching the flocks. So these sons of Zilpah and Bilhah probably let some of the sheep get eat up by wolves, or they were asleep on the job, or whatever. And Joseph saw what was going on and went back and told Daddy, you know. But that was probably his job, to watch what was going on. In verse 3, we learn about the coat of many colors, given to Joseph because he was Jacob's favorite. There's much discussion about what this phrase means in Hebrew. The phrase used means royal tunic with long sleeves. The use of colors was used to tell that the tunic was special, with various colors which were rare back then. Only important people had sleeves on their tunics. A normal tunic never had sleeves and was not dyed any color. Many scholars say that it was more of a coat or a robe than a shirt. The word used was ketonet pasim, or royal tunic. Jacob had marked Joseph as his prince. I mean, everything back then was brown. There was no reason to try to make it a color.
Cap.
Well, or Tosac, you know. Did Jesus have a special tunic? It has no seams and was gambled for while he was on the cross. It would have been more expensive garment to have in that day. Is he royalty? So Jesus had a special garment and they gambled for it so they wouldn't tear it up because it had no seams. It was a specially made woven thing that was all in one piece. But see, that's not the only garment he had. We'll get to that a little later. Joseph's coat would be shown to his father later to indicate his death. And Jesus was presented as dead to his father. The robe could also be an indication that the seed line would go through Joseph as royalty. Jacob was Israel, and his seed would lead to Jesus. Verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words." So he's basically predicting to them that they're going to bow down to him and he's going to have dominion over them. They don't want to hear that at all. Okay? So we are reading Bible verses and it talks about a dream. Why would it discuss a dream just a couple of verses into a chapter? This dream must be a special dream. In fact, soon enough, we will see it is a prophecy, and it will come true. In previous chapters, we have seen one-on-one communication with either God or an angel. God can and will communicate with his people through dreams, but we must remember not every dream is communications with God. God even will communicate with pagans through dreams, as we will see with Pharaoh later and also in the book of Daniel. Joseph tells his brothers that he will stand over them and his brothers will all bow down to him. Of course, they didn't like him in the first place, but now they really hated him. Now, we know that the Egyptian Pharaoh had already had a dream about Abraham and Sarah. If you remember back when he took Sarah as one of his harem, and God gave him a dream and told him that you messed up and I'm going to kill you. And that's when he went to Abraham. Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? You told me she was your sister. That was a dream. So God even talks to people, pagans, in dreams. And before, we've seen the patriarchs were all talked to personally by God, or an angel was sent to them. But we also see now that Joseph, he never goes face to face with God. He has dreams. So this is kind of a little difference in what's going on here. Now there's plenty of people in the Bible that will meet face to face with the angel of the Lord, it would say. Gideon was one. There's several that meet the angel of the Lord. But he can also come to you and speak to you in a dream, or a vision, or whatever. Verse 9, Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him, and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, his father was familiar enough with dreams and such to know that the verbiage was talking about celestial bodies. He said the sun and the moon would be me and his mother. And they were talking about celestial bodies. So what we're going to find out that this dream is a special dream, different from the other dream that has meaning in other places. Joseph had another dream, and he didn't seem to understand that it made his brothers mad, so he told it to them again. But this dream was a little different. It had celestial bodies mentioned in the dream. When we get to the later chapters in Genesis, we will find that the family will bow to Joseph in Egypt, which represents the world. If you remember, Egypt is always the world, and they will come and ask for food and actually bow down to him because he's second in command only under Pharaoh. The fact that the second dream has celestial bodies in it could be a prophecy of another kind. Could it be a prophecy of another kind and another time? In Revelation 12, we see the sun and the moon and the stars also mentioned. If Joseph is a type for Jesus, this second dream might have something to do with Jesus and his second coming. Back in chapter 15, we saw Abraham getting through a dream that his people would be held 400 years in slavery, several hundred years before the event. Also on the second dream, we should notice that Jacob was upset, but he understood that the sun and the moon represented him and mom in the language of dreams. It says Jacob also kept this dream in his mind. Emphasis is put here because Jacob realizes that God has dealt with him personally in the past, and this dream may be a message that he should know about. The same was said about Mary when the angel told her of the coming Messiah, and she kept it in her mind for later. So when the angel told her that the Messiah was going to be born through her, she kept these things in her mind. She thought about them. When Jesus came to his brothers in the synagogue, he was hated. Was he hated or received in gladness? They even plotted to kill him just as Joseph's brothers did. So I'm starting to draw parallels between them, because Jesus came to seek and save the lost of Israel, and they plotted to kill him. Okay? That's his brothers. Verse 12. Then his brothers went to feed their flocks, father's flock, in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Now, if we'll remember, Shechem is the place where they all agreed to be circumcised, and the two brothers killed every male in the town. Now they're going to go feed their sheep there. Could there be anyone that was upset about losing family members there? Also, where they were in Hebron to Shechem was about 50 miles. That's quite a distance. And we're also going to find out they didn't go to Shechem. They went on to Dothan, which is another 15 miles. So now, we're talking about people walking. That's a long ways. Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron and went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in a field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" Remember I said whenever you see the word certain, we need to kind of think about that. That's a special biblical person that is being put in there to pay attention to. So he said, "I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. We don't know how long after the dreams the brothers took their flocks to Shechem, but they still remembered his dreams, and they believed him to be arrogant. In verse 13, we see Jacob and Joseph I think I meant to say sent Joseph to the flock and report back to Jacob, and then it should be Joseph and not Jacob. You need to cross out that second Jacob there. It should be Joseph. Apparently didn't have to do the actual work, but was Dad's overseer and reported sometimes bad reports back home. Joseph was definitely not popular with his brothers. Does Jesus know what we do and don't do and judge us? So even though Jesus was a human in human form, he knows what we do and what we don't do, and he is our judge. So, I mean, this is like Joseph went to his brothers and they didn't like him, but he was their judge, and he was going to go back and tell the father what they had done. It is possible that the brothers moved to Dothan, so it is possible that the brothers moved to Dothan so Joseph couldn't find him. Joseph was apparently wandering around trying to find the tracks or evidence where they had gone when a man told where they were. Dothan was about 15 miles farther than Shechem. Remember, Jacob's boys might not be popular around some people in Shechem. Verse 18, "Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, 'Look, the dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams.'" What are wild beasts in spiritual language? Okay, and remember that they are conspiring to kill him. And what did the Pharisees do? They were his brothers. They were Israelites, and they conspired to kill him. These brothers saw him coming from a good distance and had plenty of time to plot what they were going to do. They conspired to kill him just as the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus. Verse 21, but Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him in this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father. So Reuben has taken him and saving his life, but he's going to put him in a pit. But what he wants to do is come back later and bring him home, because he's the oldest, and he's going to get the blame. If anything happens to Joseph, he's going to get the blame. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Reuben heard the plot and decided to intervene to save Joseph's life. Remember, Reuben was the oldest and hadn't lost his firstborn status yet. He didn't lose it until like chapter 49. He plotted to come back later and get him out of the pit and bring him home. Reuben, being the oldest, would have the most blame if anything bad happened to Joseph. These pits were really water cisterns, and the one that they threw Joseph in was empty. Now, Dothan means two wells. You remember before we talked about two sticks, two countries, and two nations. Now we're at two wells. So he was thrown into one of them, and it was empty. To me, I can kind of see that there was no Christians yet. So Joseph is going to be the one that brings the Gentiles into the family. Okay? 25. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah, catch his name now, this is Judah, said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, just think about this. The next sentence, they sat down to eat a meal. And you have to know that Joseph was screaming out to his brothers, his own family, to help him. His own family plotted to kill him, threw him in a pit, and then sold him into slavery. Can you not hear him screaming, and they're eating their dinner? That's pretty cold. This is where I started having trouble. I was weeping and everything, because I know that family troubles are all over the place. And we think, who would plot to kill their brother and then throw him in a pit and sell him into slavery? And there are people out there that do that. There are people that are that cold. While he is screaming and crying out to him, young brother, and these are grown men, and they should know better, and he is crying out to them. To me, it was an eye-opener. They did not respond. I started to imagine Jesus here being turned over to Rome to be put to death. His Pharisee brothers had the power of life and death, and they chose death for him. It must have crushed his heart to hear them scream, "Crucify him." Judas, a member of his own church, sold him for silver. They saw Ishmaelites coming from Gilead headed for Egypt. Why would they have all of these things going to Egypt? Egypt used many spices and balms for embalming. You notice back there it said that they had balm from Gilead and spices and myrrh. That's for dead bodies. remember when I don't know if y'all were with me when Revelation was going on, but the church at Smyrna, myrrh is death. So it was a dead church. So Smyrna has the stench of death on it. Of course, myrrh smells good, but they load up dead bodies with it to make it smell good as long as they can. When you pick up these words, you need to take it slowly and think about it a minute and say, can I look at myrrh and see death? So what did the wise men bring him? They brought him gold and jewels, but they brought him frankincense and myrrh. So they were prophesying that he's going to need myrrh at some point. And of course, that's what the women were going to do when they came back to the tomb. They wanted to pile some more spices on him, and it would probably be myrrh. And like I said, it was almost a requirement that you bury somebody the day that they died, because after 2 or 3 days, the stench was so bad myrrh won't cover it up.
Right.
If you decide to go back over this lesson later, try to imagine your family or friends abandoning you and are no help or sympathy at all. Put yourself in this pit and imagine calling out and there is no response. For me, it was almost as powerful as the cross. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more. And I, where shall I go? So he's worried about himself now, and he is saying, what am I going to tell Daddy? Because we know how he feels about Joseph. And now I'm going to catch it. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in blood. Now I underlined killed on mine, but I didn't on y'all's. That word means sacrifice. They didn't just cut his throat. They did it in a ritualistic fashion. Reuben knew that he would be held responsible for not bringing Joseph home, so he panicked. In verse 31, the word killed comes from the Hebrew to slaughter or sacrifice. On the feast of Yom Kippur, 2 goats are used in the ceremony. One is killed and the other is a scapegoat. The Lord's goat is killed and the blood is used to sprinkle on the altar for the forgiveness of the people of Israel. The scapegoat is used to appear that the goat has been resurrected and the sins forgiven. And I haven't really given this much thought because in my Sunday school class, I only have a limited amount of time. But if you look at this, they kill the goat and use the blood to make Daddy think that he's dead, but he was alive, and he would be the scapegoat. And I just wanted to kind of bring that out. These are things that if you wanted to, if you go back over it, to kind of read it slowly and think about what is the meaning of Yom Kippur, what is it doing? It's for the forgiveness of Israel. So Yom Kippur is Judgment Day for Israel. Ours is Passover lamb. We get the lamb, they get the goat, if you see what I'm saying. So Yom Kippur is for the forgiveness of Israel and Israel alone. So when they come and sacrifice on Yom Kippur, that is for Israel's forgiveness, for repentance. And what did Joseph do? He forgave his brothers.
Yeah. It took a lot of forgiving, I would think.
Well, I'm pointing it out to show you how beautiful the Bible is and how perfectly it is written, down to even the verbiage that they use. Every word in it has meanings that if you explore it far enough, it will keep opening up and keep opening up things. And to me, it makes a believer out of me. The belief and faith in the Bible is so strong. I may not understand it right now, but I know it's correct. You know, and you don't want to sit there, if you say, well, no, that's not right. That's why when the names were a little different last week, I know they're correct. I just don't know why they're not right. I mean, they don't agree with the other. When they listed his wives, it had to be for a reason that probably a Hebrew rabbi would know, but I don't know what it was. But I know that the Bible is exact. It can be taught as a history book. That's how exact it is. And some archaeologists might say, well, no. I'm saying he is misreading the archaeology. because this is correct. Genesis 37:32. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it's your son's tunic or not?" I'm sure that there was only one tunic like this. This was a stupid thing to me. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Now, how did he know wild beasts got him? They didn't say anything about that. We don't know what story they said. They just asked him if this is your son's tunic or not.
Who asked that?
The father is the one. It says the brothers. Do you know whether this tunic is son's tunic or not? And Jacob recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic." And then I underlined, "A wild beast has devoured him. Without a doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Now, what happened to Jesus? The devil killed him on the cross, and he was torn to pieces. He was unrecognizable as a man. Okay? So I underlined, "A wild beast has devoured him." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. So I can just see a picture of God watching his son be murdered. And I'm sure God knew from the foundation of the world that he would rise again. But that doesn't mean that his heart wasn't hurt and that he wept for him and he was inconsolable. They soaked Joseph's tunic in blood, and they carried it home and asked their father if he recognized it as Joseph's. What a stupid thing to say. Everyone knew it was his, as it was unique. All of them worried about the tunic from the time it was made. Then Jacob jumped to the conclusion that Joseph was eaten by animals. He had no clue that it might have been his own sons. Why didn't he say, "I know y'all hate him and you probably saw him and killed him"? You think Daddy didn't know that there was strife going on in the family? Even a wild animal would have left a carcass to bring home. In my opinion, Jacob knew the brothers hated Joseph, but couldn't bear to think that they had done something. Remember, the Pharisees are the one that killed Jesus, but they're still Israel. Okay? Jacob was inconsolable and would remain in mourning until he hears from his sons that Jacob indeed is alive in Egypt. In verse 34 is the first time we get introduced to sackcloth for mourning. So that's the first time sackcloth and ashes is mentioned. Later, we're going to learn that Jacob is alive in Egypt through the brothers. But right now, everybody's going with him being dead. The Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer to Pharaoh. Some say Potiphar was a eunuch, but he had a wife, and some say a child. He was a person that seems to run the prison there and probably oversaw executions. So they've looked at Potiphar, and some say, well, if he was so close to the Pharaoh, he was probably a eunuch. But he had a wife, and some say a child. But he oversaw executions, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was the jail, but he was the executioner. The question for us is what happens when we get thrown in a pit in life. Joseph was 17, but his life was about to change dramatically. He would have to grow up very quickly. Now, if you'll remember, Abraham was in his hundreds. Isaac was old. Jacob is now old. And they've been learning about God all of their life. But Joseph is about to learn very quickly about God. And he is going to have more faith than all of them because of what has happened to him. For me, I think the pit represents a time when we are about to change in a profound way. The pit can represent a very troubling time in your life. And you will either ditch God or cling to God. One of the two. So whatever is going on in your life a pit-type circumstance is going to change your life in some way. I think he probably called out to God that he had learned of through his father that he got no help from his own family. It's these times that we either abandon God or grow closer than a brother to him. We will see that even in his young age, Joseph grew in God quicker than even the father or grandfathers. Joseph was the most eminent type of Christ. And there is so many things in this chapter which show an agreement between them that cannot be passed over. There are many types of Christ in Scripture, but Joseph was the most prolific demonstration God gave us to the life of Christ. You're going to find that there's all kinds of types and shadows of Christ, but they'll only give you one or two things that are tied back to what Christ did. Joseph, his whole life, is going to show Christ-like prophecy. Joseph was the son of his father's old age. Christ is the son of the Ancient of Days. Joseph was in a special manner beloved by his father. Christ is the dear son of his father's love. Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. God prepared a human in nature for Christ, filled and adorned with the various gifts and graces of the Spirit without measure. See, I didn't want to go back to the same old coat that was gambled for, but that is a type and shadow of something that's going to come. But in fact, Jesus was a carpenter's son, but he was adorned in all of the gifts of the Spirit. So he was special, coat of many colors. And what we need to find out is a garment is like our body. When we put on the garment of praise or the garment of thanksgiving or a garment of righteousness, we are putting on something that belongs to Jesus. And that's what he is clothed in permanently. Jesus did indeed have a coat made without seams, but the adornment of Jesus was also spiritual. The Jews couldn't look upon Jesus without seeing a carpenter's son, but others saw how God had gifted Jesus with things no one else had. See, the Pharisees would look at him as just another man, but people would come from miles around to listen to him and be healed by him. So he had things that people saw that the Pharisees couldn't see. Even when he raised Lazarus from the dead, the Pharisees said, we have to kill this man. Why wouldn't you say, well, this would be a handy guy to have around in case I get sick one of these days, you know? But they wanted to kill him. They were the brothers that wanted to be the firstborn blessed, and they didn't get it. So they weren't going to let him have dominion over them. Joseph was hated by his brethren, and they could not endure to think that he should have dominion over them. The Jews, of whom Christ was according to the flesh, hated him and would not have him to reign over them. Imagine the Jews when Jesus told them that he was the Son of God and had power to forgive sin. Joseph was sent by his father on a long journey to visit his brethren and check the welfare of them and their flocks. Christ was sent from heaven to earth to seek and to save the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Joseph's brothers, when they saw him come to them, conspired to kill him. The Jews, who were Christ's own family, when he came to them, didn't receive him, but said, this is the heir, let us kill him. And they conspired to take away his life. Matthew 21:33 through 40 is that parable where Matthew is saying that God sent the prophets and they killed them. And they said, well, now I'll send my son. They surely will listen to him. And then they killed him too. So what we're looking at is prophecy just perfect. I mean, almost word for word. Joseph was stripped of his clothes and sold for 20 pieces of silver at the deeds of Judah and Christ by one of the same name, Judas. Now Judah is Hebrew and Judas is Greek. It's the same name. So the same man sold out Jesus and Joseph. Sold for 30 pieces of silver and was stripped of his clothes by the Roman soldiers. Now, 20 pieces of silver was the price of a slave during Jacob's time. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave during Jesus' time. But I think it's in Galatians or maybe Colossians, I can't remember which one. It talks about Jesus as preeminent in all things. So he was worth more. So he got 10 pieces of silver more. Joseph was delivered into the hands of foreigners who were Gentiles, and Christ into the hands of the Gentiles. Joseph being reckoned as dead by his father and yet alive may be a symbol of Christ's death and his resurrection from the dead. So we're going to find out that Joseph didn't die and Christ didn't die. Well, Christ died, but he can't stay dead. We will see many more connections to the life of Christ as we go forward. It's interesting that all of these connections to Jesus were shown to us in Genesis, but very few recognized Jesus as Savior when he came. The Hebrew scholars and rabbis taught this for thousands of years before Jesus came. It was 4,000 years from Adam. And yet, they did not recognize him when he came. They knew these stories by heart. But us, with hindsight, get to see the beauty of comparing Joseph and Jesus' life. And how God gave us this information so that we would recognize Messiah when he came. These are all prophecies. When he said that he had a dream and they would all bow down to him, and at the end of the chapter, end of the book, we find out that they all came and bowed down to him for their salvation because they were starving to death, and Jesus fed them. Jesus is our food. I mean, I'm getting all goosebumpy. I don't know about y'all, but for me, writing this lesson, I could only help but imagine what it was like to have my own family plot to kill me and ignore my cries for help. If your own brothers would do this, we need to realize we are truly alone in this world. There is nothing for us here but God. He is our help. He is our friend. He is our provider while we're on earth. Next week, we'll leave Joseph in slavery and switch to a story about Judah. It will seem almost out of place, but I hope to show how God needed to tell this story in order so that we would understand the kinsman redeemer, Levirate marriage, and the book of Ruth and Revelation 5. Then we'll return to Joseph's life as the rest of Genesis is dedicated to him and the prophetic blessings of Jacob giving to his children.